Imagine you're standing on a stage about to give a performance. The lights are shining in your eyes, your heart is beating out of your chest, and it's time to start. Whether you're giving a speech, playing an instrument, or putting on a play or musical, or giving a TED Talk. Now, how do you ensure that you're going to give your absolute best performance? This is the question that I asked myself in the past few weeks leading up to this performance, as I essentially just described the position that I'm in at this very moment. Some may probably say that the most important thing is preparation or practice. Others may talk about how knowing how to calm your nerves or not think about how many people are watching you, emphasizing the importance of concentrating on what you're doing in that very moment. Now, all of these things are important factors in helping you to perform better. But the key factor, the secret sauce, is something called flow, or the flow state. So what is flow? You may have heard famous musicians or athletes refer to it before, or maybe the term is entirely new to you. It's essentially a mental state in which a person has become so fully immersed in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. It's like being in the zone, when you have become so absorbed with whatever you're doing that everything else seems to fall away. Take Michael Phelps, Yo-Yo Ma, or even Magnus Carlsen. They have all made it to the top after finding success in a countless number of high-pressure performances. Michael Phelps has won a total of 28 Olympic medals. He's the most successful Olympian of all time. Yo-Yo Ma is widely recognized as the best cellist of our time. And Magnus Carlsen is currently the highest-ranked chess player in the entire world. Think of the sheer number of races, concerts, and chess matches that the three have had to perform in throughout each of their lives. Now, Michael Phelps has talked about getting in the zone before every single one of his races. Yo-Yo Ma has discussed the importance of practicing regularly from a young age. And Magnus Carlsen cited determination as the key to his success. So what do they all have in common? Everything that they described is part of being in the flow state. So being in the flow state requires having an immediate feedback loop between your mind and body. Whatever you're doing must have clear goals and rules. And then that immediate feedback will tell you how well you're doing in achieving those goals. Take chess, for example. With every move, you will know whether you're in a better position to win the match or not. Or in the Olympics, Michael Phelps will know with every stroke whether he has a better chance of winning a race or not. Now, flow does not have to be something grand. It doesn't require you to become the absolute best at any given activity, but you can actually find flow in the tasks of your everyday life. So today, I'm going to talk to you about how you can achieve peak performance through finding flow. And I will tell you about why I care about flow, how to achieve it, and why it's more important than ever in our modern era. So I grew up in a musical family. My dad is a cellist, and my mother is a piano teacher, so I ended up performing quite often from a young age. I initially learned both the piano and the violin, but I eventually found my way to my favorite instrument of all, the viola. But for a long time, I didn't understand how to get the most out of my practice time. I would learn the notes, the rhythms, and using some small amount of musicality, I would come out of each of my performances feeling decently satisfied. But it wasn't until more recently that I realized in order to bring my performances up to the next level, I needed to also figure out how to practice at a higher level. So about a year ago, I was home practicing the viola. The world had just turned upside down. School was online, I hadn't been out in days, and it was getting impossible to buy toilet paper. But in some ways, I felt more clear-minded than ever before. I felt fortunate that my parents could work from home and that I could spend more time with them. And classes had turned pass-fail for the remainder of the year. For once, I felt grounded, being able to take a step back from my responsibilities and not constantly have commitments pulling at my attention. Now, this is when I discovered flow. Now, for my musical endeavors, I discovered that to enter the flow state, you're required to have your level of skill and challenge match. Now, this will require you to have and ensure that you maintain a high level of focus. That's how I realized that in scales, the majority of people find them to initially be too boring to hold your attention. And growing up, I also thought that they were just a task to get done at the beginning of my practice time before I could move on and get to working on my pieces. At the time, that's because I didn't realize how working on scales could truly improve my practicing as a whole. By practicing scales and working more with a higher level of concentration, I've been able to achieve that flow state and essentially ultimately get more out of my practice time. So how does anyone achieve flow? Like I said before, it's not grand, and it's not something that you need to spend ages working towards. There are 3 things that you need in order to enter the flow state when you want to. First, practice, purpose, and presence. Flow-producing activities typically require an initial investment of attention in order to later become enjoyable. Now, this is a cycle of when you're interested in something, you focus on it, and when you focus on something, you're likely to become interested in it. Now, for example, take playing an instrument or learning an instrument. When you first have to learn it, you have to have an initial amount of practice before you can begin to fully enjoy it. In my own experience, I honestly am not sure if I enjoyed learning an instrument from the beginning. I think I convinced myself that I did because I thought I was supposed to, growing up in a musical family. But that was before I realized how fulfilling practicing could actually be. And discovering flow and getting into the zone has re-emphasized to me the importance of quality over quantity. Yo-Yo Ma once said, "Mastering music is more than just learning technical skills. Practicing is about quality, not quantity. Some days I practice for hours, other days it will just be a few minutes." Now, like I said, every teacher that I've ever spoken to will probably tell you to practice every single day. Practice and you'll improve faster. Practice and you'll ace your next performance. Now, it wasn't until I discovered flow that I really zoned in on this idea of quality over quantity, because practicing while in the flow state made it 100 times more worthwhile to me. So to enter the flow state, it's also important to have purpose. Flow activities typically have clear goals and rules, and they also give immediate feedback. So these clear goals and rules encourage us to maintain a high level of concentration and to avoid distractions and to use our skills to the fullest. Confidence is an important one, plays an important role with this one. Because it can be difficult to focus if you don't have enough confidence in yourself and in your skills to do whatever it is you're trying to do. For me, this means knowing how I want a piece to sound and trusting that I practiced enough in order to execute it well. Irma Bombeck once said, "Worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it never gets you anywhere." And I've struggled with this some before because I found that worrying and not having enough confidence will very quickly pull you right out of the flow state. And that's why it's also important to have presence. Being in the flow state requires you to have complete control over your attention. It isn't only confined to occurring in performance, because like I said, you can find flow in the tasks of your everyday life. But it's about reaching this high level of concentrated attention in which you're fully utilizing your skills. I think a good example here is tennis, a sport that I played for most of my life growing up. When you're out on the court, it's just you, the ball, and your opponent. And I found that what can play a large role in defining your performance during a match is your mental state at the time. It's important to have a high level of focus, because if you don't, if you're not keeping your eyes on the ball and standing on the balls of your feet, you will miss the return shot. Being completely present and refusing to respond to any distractions is key to being in the flow state. How often do you think the average person is in flow? It's likely not often for most, and sometimes even never for others. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi first coined the term flow in 1975, in 1975, when he was conducting a study on where happiness comes from. But of course, things have changed significantly since 30 years ago. For one, people nowadays spend a majority of their time on their smartphones and computers, technology that has undergone major developments since the concept of flow was first developed. My grandfather used to always caution me against spending too much time on my phone because he always had this constant wariness about the potential addictiveness of these devices and what spending too much time online would do to my mind. And he was right. With the way smartphones make entertainment so easy and accessible, it's a miracle. It may seem like a miracle that anyone that ever has one is bored. But in reality, the majority of tasks done on a smartphone are not challenging enough to hold someone's attention in a meaningful way. People's actions have become so much more reactive nowadays, and an overall decreasing in happiness can be correlated with more time spent online. So, flow activities require that initial investment of attention that I talked about earlier in order to eventually become enjoyable. And if someone doesn't have the energy to put in that, to overcome that initial barrier, they'll settle for something potentially more accessible, but potentially less enjoyable for them. Now, I grew to love my instrument because not only did it give me a way to express myself through music, but it also taught me how to get into flow. I grew to realize that flow increases your happiness as well, because people feel the best when they're fully immersed in either meeting a challenge or discovering something new. In my experience performing musically, during every moment, I know whether I am in every note, measure, and line of music that I play, I know whether I am shaping the piece to sound exactly how I want it to. And that's the most fulfilling part of all. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote in his book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, that it's when we act freely, for the sake of the action itself rather than for ulterior motives, that we learn to become more than what we were. Flow will not only help you to create peak performance, but it will also help to bring you happiness and fulfillment in your actions themselves. To finish my talk, I'm going to perform for you a prelude from Bach's Third Cello Suite to show you an example of how I find flow. Thank you.